Okay, so welcome everyone. My name's Dr. Louise Munro and I am here today for an interview with Dr. Leonie White and Dr. Roger Lowe. Leonie, I'll hand it over to you for the acknowledgements.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. So we wanted to acknowledge that we're filming here today on the lands of the Turrbal and Yuggera people. And to pay our respects to the importance of culture and to the elders past, present and emerging who do hold the culture and the hopes and traditions and future of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the nation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that many of you have met Leonie. She is the founder and director of Phoenix Family Therapy Academy. Many of you might also know Dr. Roger Lowe. Roger is the author of a family therapy text that probably a number of you would be familiar with as well. Author of numerous articles and has been a lecturer and program coordinator across universities in Brisbane and probably other places, Roger. There's probably more for us to learn about you in your long career of working in this particular area. So thank you both. Leonie, what were your hopes for this interview today?
Yeah, it's a great question. My hopes were to have some conversations with Roger that might be helpful for family therapy trainees and people who are interested in solution-focused grief therapy. Mm-hmm. Roger, I've been lucky enough to learn from and to have as a teacher and mentor, and we've had some really great conversations. And I know, Roger, you were letting me know that you've been around solution-focused grief therapy for a while and seen it kind of grow and develop. And so my hope is that we can kind of talk about some of those changes and some key things, from Roger's perspective. That would be great for not just trainees, but, maybe people who are experienced but still just want to kind of learn a few finer details.
Yeah. And Roger, you've been part of the changes and seen the changes in this particular approach over time. So I think that puts you in a really good position to draw out the evolution.
I first started teaching SFBT in the late 1980s. And it only started in 1985. So I've been teaching it for a long, long time. And I've kind of lived through the changes that have occurred through the model over the years. So I think my best hopes are to try to convey some of these changes and give people options about what they can pick from the various versions and how it may help them develop their framework for systemic family therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, Roger, because sometimes when things evolve and there's a new version of something, sometimes people feel like they've got to kind of throw out the older ways of doing things. So I think this will be a really great part of our conversation.
Yeah, it's kind of a yes and kind of thing, not a yes but kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think when people learn about SFBT, often they don't learn it in a very thorough way because it's still not a mainstream model. The APA in America only recognised it about 2 years ago when they first allowed a book to be included in the APA. It was just like a therapy.
Yeah.
It's just, and so it's still very much on the fringes, and in many programs it's taught in a very tangential way.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's taught with brand name cliches like medical questions, scaling or exceptions.
Yeah.
And they've kind of become cliched over time, and they look at really old videotapes.
Yeah.
And often the model's moved on from those.
Yeah.
So I think that's the dilemma that people have. They often don't get trained in a very in-depth way.
Yeah.
So, but I think that overall goal that you both have there sort of shapes the way the conversation can go for the next little while.
Yeah, perfect.
And, so maybe 1985 is a good place to start, Roger.
Oh, gosh, feels like that. I just come to Brisbane, so yeah. I think what we were talking about before was that when you try to divide the model into two periods of development. About 10 years ago, Mark McCowago, he works in organisations, drew a difference between SFBT 1.0 and 2.0. And not everyone agrees with that. Some say it's difficult to put them into two categories. Some say there should be a third one, 3.0. But as a teacher, it's a useful contrast to make. And I think that distinction helps to encapsulate some of the major changes in the model. So that might be a good place to start talking about the differences of the model. Maybe I could outline the classical version 1.0. Back in the day when people wanted to do research, they had to manualise the model. So when they manualised it, they often had certain steps which was taken to be real SFBT. Typically, a client, let's say the client's struggling with depression, for example, they typically come in and say, what you in today? And then you try to focus on what they want to be doing apart from doing depression. So you might ask the medical question. If medical happened tonight, and while you were asleep, the medical happened, the problem the voice has disappeared. Depression's gone, how would you know? And the client would say something like, well, tomorrow I'd get out of bed and I'd have breakfast and I'd talk to people, maybe I'd go to work and these kinds of things. So you're trying to get an idea of if the problem wasn't there anymore, what would you be doing instead? And the client might do that, and then you might ask a scanning question. Like 10 is you're totally confident the miracle will happen, and 0 is the opposite, we'll just say you are. I might say, well, not for you, or whatever it is. At various points, you might ask acceptance questions. Are there times when you haven't felt that question during the last week? What was happening again? How did that happen? You might ask some coping questions. When things are at their really darkest and you're feeling really worse, what do you do to keep surviving? And then you have a break because you're working with a team. This comes out of the family therapy strategic sort of history. You have a break, and then you go behind the screen and talk to your team, or if you're working alone, you make some notes, and you think of some compliments to the client, and then a task to give them. And the compliments would depend on what the client had answered to the scaling question. For example, if the client said that they were at 9 on the confidence of being able to have a miracle happen, you might say, count them on their confidence and their ability and their determination. And you might give them an action task like in the next week, pick one day, pretend miracles happened and behave as though it's happened that day. Or pick a day next week and pretend you're 1 point higher on the scale and act that out during the day. And that was kind of the model. And as you can see, it comes from the strategic family therapy background with the idea that the task is important. And the questions are used to help the therapist decide what compliments to give and what tasks to give. So if they say, I'm 0.9 on the scale, you compliment them on their confidence and their energy. If they're 1 on the scale, you compliment them on their being realistic and how difficult the struggle is. And you might ask them to observe any times when they're slightly higher on the scale in the next week. So you give an observation task, but it's easier to do than an action task. But the assumption, I think, was that the task was really important. And maybe that's where the change happened. So just like in other models of family therapy, you do something to break up the patterns and the task, so you're focusing on what happens outside of the session as being the main ingredient of the change.
And I guess that fits, in terms of the roots in strategic work, because giving directives would be a fairly common thing in strategic family therapy. So it feels like the task is almost kind of like grown from that giving directives.
Yes. SFBT grew out of the MRI model, which is its predecessor. I won't go into that, but it's that was also a task giving model. And I think that was that if you look at some of the older tapes, that's the accepted practice of doing good SFBT. What happened since about the turn of the century is that people like Brief in London, Chris Iverson, Harvey Rappner, Ed and George, they started to drop off the task because they felt that clients often didn't do it, and it didn't even make a difference to how many sessions they needed. And there's something sort of not quite consistent, because if you think that the clients are experts in their lives and they're collaborative, why give them homework? Because it comes back to the idea of the therapist as an expert telling them what to do. So they drop the tasks off, and if you drop the tasks off, you might as well drop the compliments off, because the compliments are used to set the task up. And therefore, you might as well drop the break off as well, because the break's used to think of the compliments and the task. Okay? So in the later models, the emphasis on the change in the session and the actual flow of the questions and answers is the therapy. So that's much more reflective rather than action-based. I think that's one of the key things between the two models.
And I think a lot about the idea of compliments as well, and how it fits as well if we privilege our clients as having their own expertise and insider knowledge around what's best for them. And so I think sometimes compliments are helpful depending on how they're given, but sometimes they're not helpful because we're almost saying, this is the thing that I appreciate. So does that mean that I know my client better than my client knows himself?
So people started to reflect on, are these things really as useful as we think they are? I think the other change, there was an article written in the 1980s called Solution-Forced Therapy, which criticised the fact that sometimes in SFBT people are trying to push the client up the scale. There's pressure to change. So it's like behavioural therapy. I was trained in CBT as my home base, so that's why I found this easy, because it's to do with behaviour, it's to do with thoughts, so I found it easy to switch to it. So there's been a reaction to, I guess, being too pushy and trying to get clients to change too quickly.
That makes sense to me.
So some of the things that you've mentioned there kind of point to some of the different assumptions we have about what are change mechanisms in therapy that have changed over time. And I guess if we bring in that kind of reflective approach to our practice, it invites us to think about what assumptions we have about clients and problems and capacity as well. So all of those changes are linked in those ways. It was interesting to me, Roger, when we started this conversation, you said that SFBT was only introduced quite recently into the American APA. And yet I think a lot of people, particularly in organisations, are being asked to deliver solution-focused therapy. And it's often, that's been happening for a decade or more, and it's often a kind of conflation of terms there, I think. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
So what I'm thinking is there are a lot of people who think they're doing solution-focused therapy because the organisation has asked them to work in 6 sessions and focus on solutions. Can you just sort of distinguish how that colloquial idea about working in a solution-focused way is different from this?
Well, I think that solution-focused isn't defined by the number of sessions that you give. It's defined by a mindset. And you hope to achieve more in less. It's very much the minimalist model. And so I think that's one thing that's changed in the model since then too. There's more emphasis on the brief therapy part. People often forget that the actual title is solution-focused brief therapy. Brief therapy is the noun, SF is the adjective. So it's one branch of brief therapy, other branches being single session therapy, electroshock brief therapy, MRI brief therapy. And I think sometimes people separate the SF from the BT and they forget that it's meant to be a BT, where in brief therapy the idea is to leave a light footprint in the client's life, to get in, get out, not get in the client's way. And it's minimalist. You try to, it's been said that you try to know and do as little as possible in order to create change. You don't want to become the the my therapist person in somebody's life, but that can depend on you. So you try to do as little as you can in as few sessions as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the hardest things for integrationists to come to, because there's a tendency to want to keep going and set goals and have long-term therapy.
So I think in this, the way this conversation's going, I think it's you've given us a little bit of an indication of where we've started, and maybe looking at some of the really key changes between, you mentioned SFB 1.0 and 2.0.
Okay, yeah. Depending on when you first read about it or which tapes you've seen, most people will probably be aware of Steve DeShazer and Andrew Kinberg's work, and that's in the 1.0 camp, I guess. Some of the therapists who influenced me in recent years in 2.0, even though they might not call themselves 2.0, are people like people in Brief in London, Chris Iverson, Evan George, Harvey Ratner, Michael Durant in Australia, Elliot Conning and Adam Crower from the US. So they've been my influences. So you won't tell I actually like SFB 2.0. It's my more reflective kind of style.
Yeah.
So some of the jargon's changed. For example, what used to be called exceptions are preferred, often they're called instances. The idea being that if you talk about exceptions, you've got to keep talking about the problem. You've got to keep saying, other times we won't do this. So it's back, it's problem talk again.
Yeah.
Whereas these days, you might, if someone says, I want to get over depression, you might say, and what would be happening instead? And I might say that I'd get up in the morning and I'd get out of bed.
Yeah.
And what would happen then? Maybe I'd go to work.
Yeah.
Maybe I'd feel more my old self. Then you could say, have there been times when you felt your old self recently, even in a small way? So that's looking at instances of the preferred future rather than acceptance of the problem. And it kind of makes more sense to do that. And it makes you take your time and find a preferred future.
And I think, Roger, is that consistent with some people talk about a moving towards approach as opposed to like a moving away from approach?
Yeah, that's perfectly good.
Yeah.
So you want to try to ask questions which lead to what you want to do instead. I think it was Aya Connie who said that the two key words in SFBT are suppose and instead. Suppose this happened, what would you be doing instead?
Yeah.
And I think that's really key to understanding some of the new approaches to you try and help people chart a path to what they want to be happening instead of the problem.
Yeah.
So you drop the problem off and focus on what they want instead.
Yeah.
Another change, I think, is that people don't tend to try to help people to plan new steps. They ask for signs. So if you're doing a scaling quest and you say, if 10 years you're confident that you can be your old self and do your jobs, where are you? I'm at 5. Rather than saying, what would you need to do to get to 6? So if you were at 6, how would you know? What would be a sign that you moved to 6? So that's another example of not being action-oriented, but more reflective and not trying to push you up the scale. So I think that's another example of the way the language has changed somewhat.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And now for the one that picks people up, the change from goals to a preferred future or best hopes.
I know, and we've had quite a few conversations about this one.
Yeah. This is the hardest thing for people who want to integrate it, because we all do goal-focused therapy.
Yeah.
Where you work out a goal, you devise a treatment plan to reach it, and you measure change towards it.
Yeah.
In the SFB point 2, that's not quite what happens, because that's not brief therapy. Goal setting is not brief therapy. It's by its nature, it's different, because you're saying, we have to stay in therapy until you reach these goals, which is not the way you do it. So people will now try to find the best hopes or the desired outcome. And the desired outcome is something that people want to achieve in this present session. So I want to be an example. If someone's coping with depression and they want to change and you keep asking them how will they make a difference, They might say, you might go in a sequence of, I get on the bed, I'd socialise again, I'd go back to work, and have life vitamins, I'd feel more my old self. Now that's an outcome. The other things are steps towards it. So often goals are action steps towards it. The outcome is a feeling or a state of being, not something you do. So feeling like your old self again is an outcome, not a goal. And then you work on that for that session. If you see them again, you may or may not work on it. See the idea? In second sessions in recent models, you start by saying, what's better, what's been different? And you don't try to tell the person what they're better at. So what you wouldn't say is, last time you said that you were at 0.5, you're 5 on the scale in terms of being your old self. Where would you say you are now? See, that's not reflexible. You're setting the goalposts there. The client can only respond in terms of the goal you've set. So people tend to do that because that's what we do in therapy. You know, we especially psychologists love numbers. We like to measure things. So doing that is a challenge because goal setting seems a normal thing for us to do. But it's moving away from the reflective idea that the session may be the last one you need.
And I like, Roger, if I've got this right, one of the things that I really love about this idea of moving towards like a preferred future is that it fits with my ideas from narrative practice too around like a preferred identity and people kind of moving into the person that they want to be and how they want to live their life as opposed to achieving some sort of, you know, concrete goals or behavioural changes. It's more about who they are and how they are in life. Is that kind of...
I think the preferred future idea is to broaden it out from concrete goals. And in SFBT, this often gets forgotten, but it's an interaction model. People often separate it from interaction. So you're always interested in if you change, who would notice it? And how would they respond if you change? So that you put the contextual stuff in. The preferred future is much broader than that. And what you said reminded me of a good way of putting it. I was once trying to teach a class and I was trying to multitask. So I wrote a goal on the board and talked to the class, but I actually wrote jail as a goal. And they said and laughed. But I thought, what a great teaching opportunity, because if you're not careful, you can imprison the dialogue with a concrete goal and stick to it. So maybe a compromise is to ask clients, you know, what's been different, what's been better. If nothing develops, remind them, last week we talked about this, is this still important or not? So in theory, each session would have its own best hopes. More than maybe a connection. But you don't try to build a connection as a matter of principle. You let the client decide if they're on a different page or they're back there.
And I get a sense that really highlights as well that each session is driven by the client, not by the therapist at the start of the session, kind of, you know, deciding what we need to work on.
It's so difficult because, I mean, having a fixed goal gives an anchor and a direction to the work. And as professionals, we want something to measure. So that goes for how good we are. So there's a great imperative to have a fixed goal as a theme and measure progress towards it, using whatever measures we do. So it's you're coming up against those typical professional expectations of how you work in this in our profession. So.
And even pop psychology, people talk about SMART goals all the time. So I think it's, you know, it's kind of a construct.
I was going to say, I don't think it's just therapists. We live in a world that's all about measuring things. But that reminds me, at some point some of the language changed around it being solution-focused and being future-focused. Where has that landed?
Again, it depends who you read. Some people still say the essence of it is that future-focused. Some say it's more about details of the outcome, that you want a rich description. One of the things I read that today is that in the new versions, description comes before action. So you try to describe the preferred in minute detail, hoping that will evoke movements towards it. So rich descriptions of the preferred future or the desired outcome is what people tend to do these days, rather than set tasks and things. In fact, the way you end sessions is quite different now for many people. These days, people end the session just by saying things like, thanks for answering all my questions, putting all that effort into it. Is there anything I haven't asked you think I should ask?
Mm-hmm.
And do you think another session would be useful?
Mm-hmm.
And some leave it at that. And some might say, if you meet again, I'm going to stop asking what's been better or different. So please keep an eye out for that and let me know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. No messages, no compliments, no tasks.
No summing up.
No summing up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because if you're summing up, you're giving your summing up.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't actually know what the client's saying. Some people, somebody said, well, shouldn't you ask the client how useful the session was?
Mm.
And the answer is the client can't know at this point. They
Yeah.
won't know until they go back into their world. They can know
Yeah.
if they felt better, but they can't actually know until they go back into their real world how useful it's been. So there's maybe no point in asking that. And if you ask, I'm going to ask for feedback. Somebody just says to you can ask them things like, what have you heard yourself say today that's new or interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Which focuses on their answers rather than your questions. So
Yeah, because a lot of people would say something more general like, what has stood out for you in this session, which could be something about the therapist, but you're saying you want it to be the client noticing what they've heard themselves say.
Or I could say, what questions did I ask you thought was useful, which focuses on you.
Yes.
But if you ask, what did you hear yourself say today or think today that's different than you, that allows the client to focus on their answers.
Yeah.
Actually, one thing we haven't talked about is the best hopes question, which is
Well, is now a good time to do that?
Yeah. People used to ask questions like, what will you in today, or how can I help? But the best hopes question, well, we're dealing with hope, so you're trying to build up hopes. And the question is, the people that brief tussle over, should we ask what are your best hopes for the session, or what are your best hopes from the session? And from the session is better because it focuses on the outcome. Best hopes for the session mean what you want to do in the session. I want to explore my feelings, I want to hypnotise, I want to look at the past. So the idea of the best hopes from the session is to make it outcome focused.
Yes.
Rather than goal focused.
Roger, that it really sort of caught my attention too, just in terms of SFBT and use of language. Because the actual words we use, even then you were just saying, do we use the word from the session or for the session? I really love throughout the history of solution-focused therapy the attention to language and things like presuppositions or just presupposing the best in people to maintain that hope. I wonder if there's anything, that stood out for you that's helpful for people to think about the actual words you use, like the attention to detail of language.
And I can also imagine someone responding to a question like that with, my best hopes from the session. What do you mean?
But you could say, like, how are you hoping that in your life outside of here, things will change from coming here and talking today? So, how are you hoping that, imagine living here in an hour's time, feeling better. What do you think would have to happen? So there's a variety of ways you can ask about because like a chess game, the way you start will influence the way it ends. And so those small things can get you off to a good start and not a good start.
Because I think with students stepping into a model or anyone stepping into this model, often we're delivered information that kind of suggests the question will just land. So if we're understanding what the purpose of the question is when we're confronted with the question from the client, then we're a little bit more comfortable with unpacking that.
That's a really good point, because I think that some people just ask the question out of the blue. And for a client, that's very disturbing, that's strange. So I think it's useful to set the scene for the questions. So I'm going to ask a strange question now, it might seem really weird, but do you mind indulging me? So I'm going to ask that. So you can set the questions up so that they don't seem so strange. It's like problem language is a different language from solution language. So someone asking questions about change is like someone switching from English to German or something. It's a different language and it's confusing. So someone was setting the questions up by saying something that can help ease the way to. You need some sort of bridging passage to the new language.
So it's about understanding, because you spoke about language, Leonie. You're talking about that specific language. So it's about understanding what your intention is.
I was just about to say that when you asked Roger the question a moment ago, it really brought up that word intentionality that we've talked about a lot in our work together. And so if you're clear in your intention for asking the question and where that fits in the philosophy of what you're trying to do, then you should be able to work out the nuances of the language and what you're trying to achieve. And then if the question is still unusual to your client and they want to know more, if you're clear on your intention, you'll be able to explain your question and you'll get there.
And you won't be thrown by being asked to explain it.
And enough, that's one of the things that they never do. People never explain to the client. And I can't see why you couldn't explain some of the ideas to me if they'll reach the way to the questions. People tend not to ask, not to explain the model to them. So,
if you were to explain the model to a client, how would you explain it?
I'd probably try to say that I'm going to focus on things that are important to you and that which will help your future. And I'd like to focus on things that will make a difference for you. So you can tailor it to your particular wants, to your particular hopes. Something along those lines. Because as I said, otherwise, if a client has been to other therapies or has seen therapy on television, this is going to seem really weird.
Totally. And some of my clients, and I don't know kind of what you both would think about this, but some clients I see who've had past therapies, and not that I privilege one particular way of working. I think everyone works in different ways and there's lots of things that are helpful. And what happens sometimes is my clients come in, they've got a particular idea, like we've got to talk about the problem, we've got to solve the problem, we've got to have an action plan for the problem. And sometimes I use a metaphor with them, that, the thing that we pay attention to is often the thing we get more in life. And so, do we want to be paying attention to the problem and focusing on that, or do we want to be paying attention to those instances of the preferred future, times when the client feels like they're acting more in line with their best hopes for themselves?
And there could be clients who previous therapists never ask questions. They reflect and they sit in silence and interpret. So even the question asking thing can be very foreign to some people.
Or just tell them what to do.
Tell them what to do.
And I think that reminds me that I find a really useful question with a new client on a first session is, what's your experience with therapy and counselling previously? It gives you a bit of an in as to whether or not they were happy with whatever that was. This is going to be very different. Or whether they weren't happy with what that was, which is a really great way to say, well, let's do something completely different.
And that's really good, What have you liked about previous therapies? And I can do some of what you like.
I do really like talking about the process of therapy in ways that make sense to my client, and I think it's very systemic to focus on process, not just content. And I also think it's just helps build safety that people, that clients have a bit more of an idea of what to expect. They're still fully empowered in that process, but they're not flying blind.
I think our profession is much vaguer than other ones. If you go to a doctor, or physiotherapist, or OT, or dentist, you've got some idea of what's happening. Our profession is so vague and so many different things. To make contact and, work out what people have had experience in the past is very useful.
Feels like a good place to actually move on to maybe a conversation about what type of clients, what presentations, for want of a better word, referrals that you might receive. Roger, what client group would you suggest this is a useful way to work with?
It can probably help every client group, perhaps more than others. If you're a purist, you do the same thing with everybody. So it's a truly process, not content. The idea is that whatever the presentation, the problem is never the main focus of the session. The main focus is always on asking about differences and small changes and best hopes. So whatever the problem is, you address it in some way, but never make it the full part of the session. And I think that's a nice way of thinking about it. One of Connie's expressions is that if you fear the problem more than you believe in the client, it's hard to do with good clinical work. So you've got to not be afraid of the problem and have a lot of confidence in the client and make this the main focus of the session, whatever the presentation is. And that's
What comes to mind when you hear that?
Yeah, there's two things. The first one, because I've worked a lot in child and youth and with families, with little and not so little people, and been having a lot of conversations with my colleague Laura Hawkins about this, who's also, her background is occupational therapy. And so I really love that you can stick to the process, but I can do that in creative ways with kids.
true.
Yeah, like through art activities and for people who, kind of spoken word isn't their preferred mode of communication. I really love playing around with different activities to engage in that exploration of the preferred future and of instances. So that came up for me. The other thing that came up for me is I've been doing some reading recently. There was an article in the Aft Context magazine around systemic questions. I think it was in that one. And someone was talking about the use of solution-focused questions with people who were patients with cancer in hospitals. And so life-limiting or life-threatening illnesses, and that this is still a really, really valid and helpful way to work when we're thinking about, and one of, I usually preface it with one of my favourite questions I've borrowed from you, Roger, or the start of the question is, given things are the way they are, what are your best hopes moving, forward? Because it's not a Pollyanna-ish approach, which I think is a myth that some people have. And that's why, when you were saying, don't be scared of the problem. Like this could be for anything.
I once heard someone describe this as mindless happy talk, which isn't.
Yeah, and that's not it.
It's missing the mark, isn't it? When,
It's not just about being positive.
No, and I think that's where some people often put this particular therapy in the positive psychology bucket and in the strength-based bucket.
Yes.
And they're quite shocked when you kind of challenge the idea that it's not really a strength-based model at all.
They're sort of in the same umbrella, but they're different.
Yeah, very different,
What if you can't find the strengths? The other thing is you can start introducing strengths towards yourself and trying to convince the client about strengths. That's not useful. So
because we're talking about dropping out compliments. That's philosophically very different.
And I think the idea is to get clients to state their own strengths rather than you introducing them to.
And I love, another one of my favourite questions, which again, I can't claim, it's through readings that I've done, is I love the competence questions. Like when you ask someone, how did you do that? How did you manage to do that? That's a conversation I think is much more useful because the client works that out for themselves.
And steers them towards maybe noticing their own competency or a compliment for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I remember having a discussion once with a student who's a very skilled high school teacher, and she used praise a lot. And she thought praise was SFBT, but it's not really. It's more from a sort of learning theory where you reinforce things.
Yeah.
And so,
it's behaviourism.
Yeah, behaviourism. Praise isn't quite the solution. You'd rather have the client praise themselves than how did you do that?
And can you say why? Because I'm thinking about this, the group of people that might be seeing this, and some of them will be familiar with this and some won't.
Yeah.
What is the issue with
praise is coming from you. It's not coming from the client. So it's probably better to ask them, what did you do to bring that out? What does it say about you that you're able to do that? And let the client take the credit for the change. And not depend on you praising them. It's more important that they praise themselves and they depend a lot on someone else praising them.
How comfortable are you with compliments, Roger?
I never get myself in that.
Challenging comments, but I mean, I think many of us struggle to hear a compliment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they can land quite disingenuously.
Well, these days with social media, people expect compliments all the time. They're praised.
So if we can generate our own, there's something potentially more powerful.
Yeah. And the compliments have to be earned. Like, Like when I give a compliment, if I tell students, if you say, you know, I'm really impressed by your resilience, imagine being cross-examined. What do you justify that on? What do you base that on?
Yeah.
It can't be phony. It's got to be based on evidence. It's got to be evidence-based resilience. So that makes the compliment more genuine, because you can explain why you're giving it, not just being polite, you know.
Yeah.
And I think when we started this little segment here on which type of clients, I think this notion of genuine communication, conversation is so important with the trauma work, because we talk about safety and there's a real risk of offering compliments in those kinds of conversations that can be seen as minimising and really cause some damage to that therapeutic relationship.
I guess the idea is that you don't abandon the model, you just go a bit slower and maybe add a few more steps to it. So, you know, there are lots of there's a trauma-informed SFBT, for example. There's books on how to work with depression, how to support the LGBT community. There's books on using it with gambling. So there's a whole variety of problem with, especially the books on using SFBT with them. So people do recognise there are different things to consider. But the essence of the model still stays the same.
What would you say is the biggest challenge to using this model that therapists might, you know?
I've probably got a couple of challenges, and one we might save for, you know, maybe the next part of our discussion around how we do or don't integrate different approaches. Because I think one challenge is working with complexity where there's multiple systems involved. For example, you know, if a young person who's under the age of 18 isn't kind of able to find stable accommodation, services might be sort of required to be in place for a while. Yeah.
And I think what you've hit on there is that in place for a while. I think that's one of the biggest challenges is the long-term.
So I'd like to sort of talk about that, you know, maybe a bit separately. But the other thing that came up for me is belief in the model. And I think it depends philosophically on your personal experiences, your what I call your profession of origin or discipline of origin. So some of us are trained more in a medical model approach that's deficit focused. And then it's really, I feel like to do, and this is just my perspective, but I feel like to do SFBT work, you really have to authentically, genuinely believe that people have capacity and that they have resources, and that, you know, I think Connie and Adam Farrar talk about, you know, you presuppose the best in people. And I think for some people they get a little worried about that because there are things in their life that have invited them to think, I've got to fix problems.
And also the other professionals find it hard to so you know, as a minority voice in a different discourse.
I think that's really important. The minority voice in a quite different discourse. And I think it's those challenges, exactly, the idea that solution focused is not long term and some work needs to be long term. I think that's a fairly strong idea in therapeutic circles.
It's really can be seen. It can seem so strange to other professions, because I was thinking this morning. You know, the terms we give a sort of pseudo-medical way, and we think about assessment, intervention, and treatment, and cure, and healing, and progress, and none of those things actually apply to that. There's no theory of assessment. There's no intervention, because you aren't sure what you're intervening in. And there's nothing that corresponds to treatment or cure. If people use healing, but what is assumed to be the organism that's healing? Whereas, you know, so these are all poetic kind of terms, which don't quite fit what's happened in the model. You can see why it's difficult to actually explain it to people in other professions.
Especially with problems that are kind of assumed to be complex. You know, we've all got different constructs around what complex is.
So it's for that reason, it's very hard to make this sound highfalutin enough to impress some of our colleagues.
So to wrap up this section, you did say it's probably suitable for everyone. There are some challenges there for the therapist around deciding that because of the long-termness.
Yeah.
Who would it not be suitable for? Is that possible to answer, or is it?
Well, maybe someone who knows that is suitable.
Yeah.
Someone who's got, or someone who's determined they want psychoanalysis. Someone's got a clear idea of what therapy they want.
Which kind of fits with that Norcross inventory stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah. What you believe, what you prefer.
Yeah.
One of the things people often forget is that the APA definition of evidence-based includes client preferences. That's one of the key things. If clients want a certain therapy, then they won't accept this one.
Yeah. Does that circle back to the Solution Forced article, Roger?
It could,
Yeah. If there are people who genuinely come in and say, this is what I'm after, I guess what right do we have to say, no, we should do it my way, the solution-focused way.
So, well, I'm a lot cheaper. So if people love long-term therapy, SFBT would say that's fine as long as that's what they want.
Yes.
You're against long-term therapy, so we're different.
Yeah.
And if someone wants long-term therapy, well, it's their time, their money.
So it's profoundly client-focused. And working with the clients, theories of change, theories of hope and expectancy, and what their beliefs are about themselves and their interaction with the world, which is very systemic too, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we start with your ideas there, Leonie, because you've spoken about being quite passionate about integration. So how are you working with these ideas?
Yeah.
And what are the challenges for you, maybe?
Yeah. I'd be really happy to start there and then sort of hear Roger's thoughts as well. So when I think about how I began to be, an integrative systemic therapist, and that's probably how I describe myself is, systemic thinking is my overarching framework for everything. And sometimes I even describe myself as a systemic psychotherapist who just has a great love for solution-focused brief therapy and narrative therapy. But I have other tools in my toolkit, and I think it was really my clients when I first started working in complex mental health services with young people who were in out-of-home care. They'd frequently had multiple placements. Some could be homeless. They would all have multiple services involved and a range of presenting issues. And my clients at that time, I felt, really taught me that I had to be able to do more than one thing. As much as, I love my narrative practice and I really love solution-focused brief therapy, it just wasn't enough. And so I would feel stuck. Because what might happen, for example, is I might, need to kind of channel some structural family therapy ideas around helping the adults, from the different services or from the foster family or residential care service, help them take back that position of leadership in the family or in the system, so that the young person wasn't left trying to find their own ways, to work out how to move forward with life. When they're too young to be expected to do that. And then I might find that I've got some new workers who didn't have a really good understanding of the impacts of trauma, how it impacts the way people think about themselves and others, how they can be triggered into flashbacks. And so I would find that sometimes I'd be doing psychoeducation. And then sometimes I would find that there would be a crisis and I'd have to do crisis management and maybe even working with my clients to help them with some DBT skills to be able to kind of self-soothe and regulate and navigate relationships. And so I'd be doing some skills building. And then I always have this philosophical kind of position, though, that my clients have capacity and that I want to, kind of support them. And I think those clients also taught me to always hold hope no matter what, because, you know, the people I've worked with are just incredible. And when you see what people manage and how they move forward with life, you can't help but not believe, but I can't help but not do just one thing.
Yeah, I think one factor is whether you have a preferred model that you try to work with all the time, like SFBT, and then you'll depart when necessary, but you come back to it when you can. So you might have to do some crisis management or some, you know, educational work, but you all have an angle allows you to come back to it. So I think that's what I tend to do. I try to focus on that as much as I can, knowing that I've got to depart from it in certain circumstances.
Yeah. I feel like there's a both ends there for me, because when we first had this conversation about it being like a mindset and a minimalist philosophy as opposed to number of sessions, that fit really well with my experience working in mental health services with young people who were experiencing the effects of complex trauma, homelessness sometimes, and sometimes would be in our service for a little while, you know. But keeping that minimalist and other assumptions, you know, in terms of honouring the client, believing in them, helping them work towards their own preferred futures, I used to kind of worry, am I not being solution focused because I'm working with them for quite a long time, but those aspects of the work that fit with the philosophy, we could still say are solution focused. And so that's kind of, you know, the way that I think about it and where I first started thinking about it. But I know there's some risks and pitfalls of integrative practice as well, and you know, maybe particularly so for a solution-focused brief therapy approach. Is that your idea, Roger, I've read about in your book around borrowing from other frameworks? So you do your preferred approach, and then if you hit a constraint, you kind of think about, what do I...
For example, if I'm working with someone who's having a panic attack or something, I could import some mindfulness techniques from that, help them calm them down, then ask, what's your best hopes? So I'm borrowing that technique just for that purpose, and then abandoning it and going back to SFT. So that's an example of borrowing something temporarily.
What we're hitting on is that you're making decisions at points where you will borrow from somewhere else. Think about what's worked before. And I guess my invitation would be for people to know what is their decision-making process. So even, I mean, I'm thinking, Roger, when you borrow something like mindfulness, I guess there's ways to do that fit with your philosophical position in a session. One way might be to let a client know that mindfulness is very good for panic and this is how it happens. Another way would be, what sorts of things have you tried? What have you heard of? What's helped? Have you heard of? Is that something that interests you? And really work a little bit more. You're still borrowing, but a little bit more with that client kind of centred privileging.
And I'm using it differently from, say, how an apt therapist might use mindfulness. So you're borrowing it, using it in your own way, and then kind of giving it back.
So it's still that idea, I think, of being philosophically congruent, but using techniques that might be from other models rather than...
So you're using the technique for a purpose that the owner might not use it for. So use it, you know, like your next door neighbour might be a great cook, he might borrow their saucepan, but you'd use it very differently than they would.
I love that. That's a good analogy.
So you'll use it differently because you want that. Or if your neighbour is someone who specialises in their model for 5 years and you've been to one day workshop, you'll use the ideas differently from the way they'll use it. So that's...
And I think it comes back to the client preference again too. And, you know, like you were saying, Roger, earlier, that, you know, if people have a specific idea of what works for them, or if we believe that people have kind of thoughts and ideas that maybe they just haven't considered, it's, I think, not imposing what we think, but it's an offering. It's like, would you be open to looking at this through a different way, but finding a way in your positioning as the therapist to present it as an offering, perhaps amongst multiple offerings, for the client to use their discernment around whether that fits for them, as opposed to presenting something as a truth that will fix them, or
and
then
they should try.
yeah, and then potentially leave them feeling worse after if they tried this technique. Different breathing techniques, and there's popular media around polyvagal hacks. And don't get me wrong, integrationists love neuroscience, but there's no simple answers. And if my clients think, if I say to them, you should do this thing, this will help you, and then it doesn't help them, they feel worse. Whereas if I say, we've had a conversation, my client is saying, I've got no idea, Leonie, I've got no bloody idea, that's why I'm here, give me a few options, but I give the options in a way that still privileges the client.
I think there's also something important to remember there about, it's not just that if we impose an idea and it doesn't work, that can cause damage. If we impose an idea and it does work, what does that say about our belief in the client's capacity to begin with, and in fostering the assumptions and intentions that we're working with the model?
Yeah, I really like how you picked up on that, the flip side of that.
Yeah, because it's not just about that caution, I think. Yeah.
One of the funny things about the word integration is that it kind of implies that we can do them all. And do them all, we go, but we like them all, Yeah. It's just not intellectual choice. We don't. We have different levels of skills and different models, different prejudices. So integration can be a bit grandiose, I think, when used that way.
And I think there is a lot of work on ourselves if we really want to be integrative, because we have to know what we believe about clients, about therapy, about change, about life, about those profoundly philosophical things. Because if you genuinely believe that people need help and it will take a long time, then this model will be a challenge for us to deliver. And that's fine for someone who is comfortable in that mode. So I think there's always something about us knowing ourselves in terms of what we're going to deliver.
And that's our sense of, how do you know how this model fits into your systemic framework, knowing yourself, knowing your own preferences. And it's interesting because in all the courses I've taught about therapy, mine's always been the SFBT voice, the one that's grounded in who wants what. One of the neurotic responses to the therapy is an interaction where you occasionally widen the lens and sharpen the focus. You widen and sharpen the focus. And SFBT has got to sharpen the focus on specific things. The systemic therapy has got to widen the lens of going out in a helicopter and looking at all different theories. And that's an inevitable tension, because in SFBT you want to get into the cab, tell the driver where you want to go, and you don't take the scenic route, you take the express route. You don't go sightseeing. With systemic therapy, you often go sightseeing all different parts of the client's life, and that's intrinsically different from focusing down where you want to go. So that's the tension I think you've got to really think about when you're doing this kind of work.
I think that's a really good point.
I remember doing case consultations in the family therapy course, the master's course, when someone put the geniogram up and people would hypothesize about all the things that could be happening, family of origin, patterns of interaction, family structures. And I'd be grounded on, but who wants what? Because I guess that's my... Tom Anderson once said that we all have an inner choir of voices, some which are harmonious and some are not, like an inner reflecting team. And the different voices, and the SFBT voice is always one that's saying, who wants what? Let's don't go too far up in the air, focus on that,
Roger, I love that reflection, and I've been in some of those consultations with you as well, and it got me thinking with the taxi metaphor about working with people who've experienced trauma, because, we talk about trauma-informed care and working safely with trauma, and I actually love solution-focused brief therapy as a way to work safely with trauma, because we don't have to revisit the trauma. We don't have to understand necessarily transgenerational history. We can just kind of look at how do we want to move forward with life, like where are we going? And so I think that's, for me, maybe it's the minimalist part of it. We don't have to know everything.
That's one of the unfortunate cultural connotations of therapy. Do you want to talk about it, as I say, too? There's always, you have to relive it, re-experience it and talk about it. So that's Therapy's always about that, which is
Yeah.
And I think there are some strong and long-term discourses that are just like that. That
Yeah.
therapy is long-term,
Yeah.
that it's about unpacking things, that it's about going into the past. And
Yeah. It doesn't always have to be.
No.
so,
I wonder if, Roger, you could demonstrate for us how sessions might end in this SFTB 2.0 for us around this conversation.
oh, okay. Thank you for participating and being such engaged people in the session. We've all answered each other's questions. Are there any questions that we haven't answered that you'd like to pose that we haven't covered yet?
I can't think of any right now, but I'm pretty sure I will after the session.
Okay, well, but you can always email those ones, and we don't charge as much for the ones that email us.
Yeah, I've got lots of questions, and I'm really taken with some of the ideas about the different roles we have,
Yeah.
and the different roles that are possible.
So now we could say, should we meet again or at some point?
I'd love to meet again.
I would love to meet again.
because it's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so our first question will be, what's been different since we last met?
Okay,
That's it.
great.
Okay, I'll send my bill in the mail and when we go.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you.
Thank you.